Okay, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Call of Cthulhu, our role Mangging. It's fun stuff. Very eagle-eyed observers may have noticed that the title says 6E instead of 7E. And this was a change that I decided on, supported by everybody else, for a couple reasons. One is 7th edition is not out yet. I think I've talked about this. The only way you can really play 7th edition is with the quick start rules, which anybody can download. You know, they're free from Chaosium's website. They're not very extensive because they're quick start rules, and so first through 6th editions, not much really changed. You know, the basic rules were pretty similar throughout all the editions. 7th edition is kind of the bigger change. If you go from an earlier edition to 7th edition, nothing really is going to be crazy. But it is kind of the biggest change in editions. And so the quick start rules definitely let you play. You know, we've been playing pretty much with the 7th edition rules. You can run, the Haunting all day with the 7th edition rules, and it's real fun, and it all works. But when you're running something like what I'm doing here, a full campaign that may take us a year or something, having just the quick start rules is... Now, at some point, the full game, the full book would come out, but for right now, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to just use quick start rules when I can have, the full 6th edition book, which is, 300 some pages, detailing, every monster, every spell, every great old one, all the rules for everything I would need, all that kind of stuff. It just makes more sense. The second reason I changed is because the campaign I was running is made for earlier editions. And it doesn't matter what edition, as long as it's not 7th. Now, you can run it with 7th edition, I was doing that, but numbers changed, and some conflict resolution changed on the way to 7th edition. The best example is 1st through 6th edition, I believe, don't quote me on this, but for 6th edition at least, and for the campaign that I'm running, it has what's called a resistance table. So you can see right here, it says resistance table. And so how this works is, this is for two competing elements. Generally player versus NPC, player versus player, NPC versus player, or, player versus object. And so, how this works is, it's basically just a list of numbers. And so, say you were trying to shove open or, kick open a door or something like that. You would look at what your strength characteristic is. So, say you had a strength of 12. So you'd go to 12 on the active characteristic. And you'd look at the door's, strength, I guess. Yeah, durability, whatever. However you want to say it, which, could be 10. And so you'd cross-reference the two numbers, you'd, go down from 12 until you got to 10, and it would say 60. And so then you roll, and you have a 60% chance to succeed. So you roll a D100, and if you roll 60 or under, you succeed. You kick open the door. And so that works, when you're comparing against two players that are facing off. A lot of spells are like power versus power, or magic points versus magic points, something like that. And so, the whole campaign has this a lot, where it just says, oh, well, compare the two on the resistance table. And so if you're playing 7th edition, which does not have the resistance table, they do it a little differently. In 7th edition, you have to, you both roll like your power, and then you look at regular success, hard success, extreme success, or fail, and then you compare the types of success, and then if you got the same success, you compare who has the higher number. It just doesn't seem as easy rather than, okay, this plus this, you look at this too, okay, 75% chance, roll, and then, okay, boom, there it is. And, 7th edition I'm sure could work fine, but, the campaign is written with the resistance table in mind, and also with all the math in mind. And it's not a huge deal, but 7th edition multiplies all your characteristics by 5. And so, you know, strength 10 becomes strength 50 in 7th edition. And that's not a huge difference, because normal, like the base rolls for when you're doing something, you know, a con times, you know, trying to avoid drowning, or you're trying to lift something, you know, whatever it is, it's usually the number times 5, which ends up being the 7th edition number. And so they just kind of took that math out. But then when I'm looking at the campaign, it doesn't, you know, it's the old numbers. And so NPC's characteristics are 13, 8, you know, 11, whatever it may be. And so then, since we're playing 7th edition, to compare the NPCs to the players, I have to multiply everything by 5. And then not to mention, like, dodge percentages changed, you know, certain skills changed, like earlier editions didn't have fighting brawl, and so I kind of just had to all mix it up. It just wasn't great. It wasn't optimal for something that I plan on running for a year or so. And so I decided to make the switch over to 6th edition. Everybody was okay with it, and so they made all their character sheets up. Okay, so yes, we're playing 6th edition. Through and through. Alright, so today's session, we did not have Ziggy. And I think I said we were going to play Shadowrun today, but Ziggy forgot that he's gone this week, not next week, so we're like, alright, well, we'll do, you know, Call of Cthulhu, we'll do something else without him. And what this was basically like an introduction for these new characters. Because pretty much everybody, except for Ziggy, decided they wanted a new character. I mean, Ed had no choice. He died. But everybody else wanted a new character. Which is fine, because I said, you know, I didn't really give you guys any, you know, warning or anything like that, so it's perfectly fine. And so, Olaf was playing a dentist. He is now playing a soldier turned anthropologist. Much better. Ren was playing a banker, a Wall Street banker. He is now playing a big game hunter. Better. Alex Johnson was playing a baseball player. He's now a private eye. Better. Ed was playing a librarian, which was okay. You could get by with that. He's now playing a psychology student. And we grabbed a new player, Reefly, who's playing a director named George Mafume. And thus, I hate him. It also makes him black. Yes, he's playing a black character in 1925. Not the smartest move. And I'm going to try not to really make a big deal out of it, but yeah, he's black. He's one of them Negroes. So, I needed a way to introduce all these new characters. And so I'm actually kind of glad that I decided to run this scenario, and we got this opportunity to run this scenario, because it all kind of worked well, I think. And so I was the other week when I started the campaign, before I decided to start the campaign, I was pondering between a couple different scenarios. One was written for 6th edition, one was written for 7th edition. The one written for 6th edition is kind of like The Haunting. It's called Edge of Darkness. So it's basically a location-based horror. So the people are tasked to go to this place, and everything pretty much happens there. You know, there's no real running around or anything like that. Everything happens at this one place. And so they would go there, and there's something lurking in the attic, and they need to basically deal with it and do this ritual to dispel it. Something like that. And so that would have been fine. I was probably gonna run that. But the 7th edition one was a much better fit for this. Because all these people are now kind of invested in these characters, you know? I told them that this is kind of a big deal, and it's a lot cooler in Call of Cthulhu if you actually get in, you know, you have a character that you want to survive, then, you know, you care if something bad happens to him. And so throwing at something like Edge of Darkness, they could die pretty easily. Kind of like The Haunting. Even less or more so than The Haunting, because The Haunting's kind of entirely in my control a little bit. I mean, Walter Corbett's still there in the basement. If they go up against him, I'm going to have to, fight him. But the other kind of stuff I can control. The danger in Edge of Darkness is this thing lurking in the attic, and they're going to deal with it at some point, and so I'm going to lash, I have to use it to try and kill him. And so it's dangerous. And the 7th edition one is called Deadlight. And so this one is just some free little scenario that it's a brand new one, I think, for 7th edition, and they gave it out to Kickstarter people, I believe. And the thing that really drew me in for this one was the danger was entirely in my control. I decide, if this thing picked them off one by one, or just picked off other people, And so that's what I really like, because I don't want to kill these people in just this introductory thing. I want them to die in epic circumstances, where they go insane from looking at some horrible eldritch thing, and then they get devoured. That's how I want them to die. I don't want them to die in just the introductory little scenario out in the woods. No, that's not cool. So I was basically going into this thinking none of them are going to die, because unless they do something, I even told them, unless you do something really stupid and my hand is forced, I'm probably not going to kill you. The danger is still there, because I can always flip out, or I could have just lied to you, something like that. But I can tell you honestly now that I didn't want to kill any of them. And so, okay, Deadlight. How I introduced this ties in directly into our campaign. That's why I liked it. So what's going to happen is, I talked this over with Ziggy to confirm it with him. He was all good with it. Ziggy he's up in New York. He's rattled by all this shit going on. And he's going to realize that he needs a new team. Because the dentist, he's done with that shit, man. He doesn't want any of that. He's going to drink himself to death now. He's seen zombies, man. The baseball player, he's not, no. He's sticking, man, he's just hitting the cages. He's doing his thing there. He's done with that. There's no reason for him to go on. Ed is dead. The librarian's dead. And the banker, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that next time. But he's no longer going to be a part of the investigation. And so this professor of classic history, he needs a new team. He needs to go on, because this is actually, it's a very Lovecraft thing, where basically it's, Dr. Armitage, Armitage, whatever. Read the Dunwich Horror, really. This is the best explanation, is, Dr. Armitage knows bad shit is going on. He knows he should not be involved in this at all. This is not right. And yet he just has this morbid fascination where he needs to know. He needs to know what is going on. What is the bottom of this, And that just drives him forward. And that, I think, is kind of the Call of Cthulhu mantra, is where, as players, bad shit is going on. You shouldn't read this book. You shouldn't look at this. You shouldn't keep going. But you just have to know. That's the whole thing. And so that's what I think Ziggy's professor is going to deal with. Because he's already kind of at the brink of insanity. He knows he shouldn't be continuing. But he's got to know what lurks in the dark corners of the world. And so he's going to call up a professor of anthropology that he knows, he's friends with at Penn State, asking for assistance. Because this professor, he knows his shit, he knows what's going on, and so he's asking him for any help. And the professor of anthropology, basically, he's too old for this shit. He can't bring himself to go on this kind of expedition. He's not in it anymore, In the old days, sure, he'd be all there, but not anymore. And so he has a research assistant. who used to be a soldier and is now an anthropologist or a research assistant. And so he's going to send him instead. And so that is Olaf's character. He also is going to ask a student that he has in one of his classes, who is Ed's character, who is he's a psychology major, but he took a class, and so there you go. And I guess something caught the professor's eye, and he's like, this kid is going to go far. Or he just hates him so much that he's like, man, I hope this little shit dies. Send him on the investigation. I don't know. He also has a friend that he met in Kenya some years back. Alfred Hemsworth III. And so this is Ren's character. He's a big game hunter. So the two met on safari. And so he's going to call him up, because basically, yeah, I guess it's not a huge it's not a spoiler or anything. The call from Ziggy's character mentions that something in this might pertain to the Carlisle expedition. Because remember, that's what they were all initially called for, is Jackson Elias had information on the Carlisle expedition, which most of them conveniently forgot about. And so Ziggy mentions this to the professor. Professor remembers that Ren's character was in Kenya when the Carlisle expedition went lost, and they hung some tribals for the murders and all that kind of stuff. And so Ren's character didn't make much notice of it. He doesn't have time for that shit. But he remembers that it was a pretty big deal. And so this made the professor of anthropology remember all this, and so he's like, maybe he could get to maybe he, if this ends up going somehow back to Kenya, this is the guy they would want with them. And I agree. So he calls up Ren's character, he agrees. Alright, so they got 3. Finally, well, not finally, they hire a private eye, because they think, we need somebody who's actually good at solving mysteries, looking into clues and doing all this kind of stuff. So a private eye is the guy you want, a police detective maybe, but you're not going to be able to just hire him or anything. So they phone up a local private eye in Philadelphia or something, wherever they are, and they get him to go along. And then finally we have George Mafume, who none of us knew how to get in or fit in. So we're just like, yeah, you're friends with Olaf's character. All right, sure. Just friends with the Negro. And so they all decided to pile into the private eye's vehicle and drive to New York. And so they got all their gear packed in there, and they're driving north. And thus, our scenario starts. And so they're driving in the night. It's about 9 o'clock. They're looking to try and find a place to settle down for the night. And a storm breaks out. A horrible, horrible storm, especially in January. It's just warm enough for it to be freezing rain. So it's terrible storm, lightning, thunder, high winds, awful. And the storm is like pushing them onwards. Like they can't turn around or anything like that because the storm is just terrible behind them, and it seems like it might get better in front of them. So they're being driven forward in the lightning and the rain and the darkness. And suddenly something like jumps out in front of them. And so he tries to careen and brake and swerve out of the way, but he just clips the side of this thing, which turns out to be a young girl. So he clips her and she goes bowls over onto the muddy road, and they careen into a ditch. Okay. And so they check on the girl who's unconscious. She's definitely looking battered, soaked, torn dress, all sorts of terrible stuff. And they push the car out of the ditch. Ren has smelling salts on his person. I don't know why, but I believe Ren. I trust him. Whatever he says he has on him, as a big game hunter, he probably does. He's going to be one of those eccentric characters. So, yeah, I believe he had smelling salts. Okay. So he rubs like that in front of her nose and trying to bring her back into consciousness. And she's just awake for like a moment. And she looks at him and she says, the light, grandfather. And she goes back. She's done. Like, And so they're like, well, we got to get to her hospital. We got to get her to a hospital. And so they want to drive back through the heart of the storm. And so I have him, the PI roll drive auto. You know, a skill, drive auto. Not one of them took skills in drive auto. You know, I think they learned that, you know, there's some useful skills that not one of them have. The other is electrical repair. I think mechanical repair also none of them had. I'm not sure. I haven't ran this long enough to say it's a beginner's mistake or anything, but it seems like having a little of a lot of skills is better than having 99 in a few skills, or 90 in a few skills. You know, specialization could get you killed. If you all coordinate perfectly, and you all are just really good at almost every skill, you know, split amongst your group, okay, but these people, you know, they're all making their characters separately, pretty much. And so they don't really coordinate. Like, we had a couple of them know Swahili for the weirdest... I don't know why. But I think Olaf switched over to Greek, which was better. Well, the big game hunter would know Swahili. But anyways. So, yeah, I think it's better to be kind of a jack of all trades. Now, that remains to be seen, I guess. But, I don't know. None of them had drive auto, so it's like a base 20% chance. And, so if he had rolled like a 1 through 3, I probably would have had to roll with it. The scenario said an extreme drive auto success, which would be like, for a 20%, that would be, you know, a 1 through 4. It didn't happen. That's not going to happen. And so, yeah, basically they almost crashed again into a fallen tree that was blocking the road, and so they just had to press on. I let Ren, because Ren was like, do I remember, is there anything like nearby? And I was like, okay, roll a know, or a knowledge, which is your education times 5. And so, it's actually kind of interesting. There's a couple different roles in earlier editions. There's idea, and idea is basically if the players are really stuck and they're just doing dumb shit that is accomplishing nothing and they have no idea what to do, I can just say, alright, roll an idea, which is your intelligence times 5. And then if they succeed, I'm like, alright, dumb shits. This is what you're supposed to do. Basically, it's more like, well, you remember reading something about this and this, you know. So that's basically like, get this back on track roll. That's what that is. And then there's the knowledge roll, which is your education times 5. And this is just kind of, like, this isn't really what I would ask for normally, you know, unprompted. This is more just, you know, do I remember this, or do I know what this does? There's... If I can find it, it explains exactly what it would be for. I doubt I'm gonna find it. It's kind of a big book. It's gonna be a long video. Yeah, alright, no knowledge roll, yeah. All people know bits of information about different topics. The know roll represents what's stored in the brain's intellectual attic. The investigator might know if one puts sulfuric acid into water or water into sulfuric acid, with whether or not ever studying chemistry, or be able to remember the geography of Tibet without a navigate roll, or know how many legs arachnids have, and possess only a point of biology. Identification of present-day earthly languages is an excellent use for the know roll. So yeah. It's not often used, But it can kind of get you out of a bind if you can remember a piece of information, something like that. What the hell was I talking about? Oh, right, Ren. Yeah, so he asked if he remembered if there's anything in the area. So he succeeded on his knowledge roll, and I was like, yeah, you remember consummate professional big game hunter, looked at a map before you departed, and you do recall that there was some sort of gas station or something nearby, down the road. And I'm like, all right. So they head back forward north, onwards towards New York, and they do eventually arrive at the gas station / cafe. And so they, so it's the gas station, which is all kind of, the lights are all off in there, and then there's the cafe, which has all the lights on, and then in the middle of the road, pretty much almost blocking the road, is a truck. It has like the door wide open. And so basically this whole scenario is set up as just a horror movie. Like, as I've seen hundreds and hundreds of times. The antagonist is kind of unique, but it's a horror movie. They're out in the dark in a stormy night. There's kind of stereotypical characters involved. And they need to figure out what's going on as they slowly get picked off. It's very much just a horror movie. Alright, so they go inside the cafe. Inside the cafe are 5 people. One is the owner, who's kind of a fat, opinionated, loud guy who's basically a coward. Okay. There's a waitress, who's kind of a glamorous redneck. The belle of the ball of the trailer park. I don't know how to really describe her. Someone who is basically desperate enough to do anything she can to get out of, where she is. So she tries to really glitz herself up, but, it's just like a veneer, She's the waitress. There's an elderly couple who are basically senile. Like, the scenario says, you can kind of play this up. They're not comic relief. They're just like lambs to the slaughter. So they'll just say like wildly inappropriate things at inappropriate time. Like, people just get murdered and they're like, oh, this apple pie is great. Like, they're there to piss off the other people, the players. Like, what the? Yeah, okay. And the 5th guy is named Jake. He's a pig farmer. He is like a dumb, drunk, racist, sexist, bigot redneck. So I enjoyed, characterizing him. And so basically, it's his truck that's careened in the middle of the road. And he is just kind of sitting there muttering, shakily about a dead light that ran him off the road and is trying to kill him. And none of the others believe him because they all know he's just some crazy redneck drunk. And so they all get in there. George Mafume stays outside because you never know, man. People can be crazy. It's the 1920. Can't believe he made a black guy. Okay. And, so they're kind of chatting in there. They bring the girl in. They take her in the back, and the owner kind of takes out the first aid kit and puts some blankets on her and stuff like that. And, they're like, oh yeah, that's Amelia. She lives up the road with her grandfather. And so they climbed right into the mystery. I wasn't sure how it was going to happen. When you have this many people, usually they're going to eventually get in. Somebody is going to be like, well, let's get into it, I guess if you have like 3 people or something like that, they may decide to just, well, let's just wait out the storm, I guess, And I was perfectly prepared to deal with that shit. I was more than prepared. And so they were kind of sitting there discussing what was going on, because they, because the girl had mentioned the light, Jake had mentioned the dead light, he was terrified of it, ran him off the road, and so they were like, maybe something's up here, And while they were out, the private eye was outside the car when they were trying to like push it out or something, push it out of the ditch. He was like looking through the woods, and he thought he saw like a flash of light that wasn't connected with the lightning. It was like interspersed with it. And so he thought somebody was maybe taking pictures of him, which is wrong, but it was an interesting theory. So he's like, maybe something's, I thought I saw something, maybe something's out there. And so eventually I was like, okay, the elderly woman says, oh, I have to go to the bathroom, I'll be right back. Oh, no, okay, I skipped a step, I'm sorry. A lot happened in the session, it was kind of crazy. Okay. The private eye and somebody else went to go check out the truck. So he finds the car, the door wide open, the headlights are on, the car is running, and nobody's inside, nothing's inside. So he turns off the car, grabs the keys, and goes inside. And he's like, whose truck is that? And Jake's like, oh, give me my keys. He's like, I'm sick of it, I'm gonna go get my shotgun. And so he goes outside, and he walks like right past George Mafume, who's kind of just like, like this, kind of trying to blend into the darkness. And so he didn't see him on his way out. He goes to the car, and he's like rummaging around in there to get his shotgun. And so George Mafume runs around like the side of the building, or the back of the building. He's hiding from the angry redneck. Because I was going to have something was going to happen. Like, there's a Negro out here, I'm going to shoot. Yeah, anyways. Not only is he black, he's the descendant of Michael Mafume. I mean, why do you want me to kill you so badly? That sounded kind of racist, didn't it? I meant black in the 1920s, not that I hate whatever. Anyways, so Jake comes back. He doesn't see him, obviously, and he goes inside and sits down. And so then they were like, "Oh, where's George? Didn't he come in?" And he's like, "Oh no." So the private eye and Neil. No, not Neil. No. Maybe it was Neil. Shit, I don't remember. We'll say it was Neil. They go around outside, around the side of the building, and they find George, who's walking back. And they're kind of sitting there just talking about the angry redneck or whatever. And I'm like, you see a man run out of the woods towards you. And he yells, "It's gonna get me!" And so they like got their guns out, they're ready to shoot this guy. And I'm like, he slips in the mud, and he falls down to his hands and knees, and he just starts crying. And so I think like George Mafume sets up his camera. Neil's just got like his gun ready, or maybe it was Simon. I don't remember. It might have been Simon. I don't know. Anyways, and then the private eye. What is his name? Shit. I don't remember his name. Something was a C. Damn it. That really pisses me off. Alright, the private eye, whatever. He's like gonna go help this guy up. And then I'm like, you see a light in the tree line or something. It's like shimmery. And you're not sure if it's the lightning or not. And so I think it was either Neil or Simon, whoever the third guy was with them. He decides, screw this, I'm heading back inside. And so the private eye's like, yeah, screw this, we're leaving him here, we're heading back inside. And George packs up his camera, he's like, yeah, I'm heading back inside. I'm like, alright, 30 seconds after you head back inside, you hear a blood-curdling scream from outside. Like, oh, shit. And so, Jake's like, what the fuck was that? Was that the light thing? I'm gonna go get it. And so he runs outside with his shotgun. And so I'm like, all right, everybody in the cafe, you just hear from outside, you motherfucker! Really just play up Jake. I love it. I want him to be a recurring character. He's basically how I would react. Okay, so Private Eye's like, oh shit. So he like goes outside, he wants to like look around the side of the building. I'm like, alright, you see Jake standing there with a shotgun. He's still like shouting at the woods. And you see a corpse. Like, or you see like a body that's not moving in front of him. And he's like, alright, I'll go in and look. And so he had to roll his sanity. Because what he saw was pretty damn horrific. It was basically like a half of a corpse. And the bottom half was like melted away. Like turned to ash / melted. Like just blended all and just nothing was really there. The other half was like, the skin was like blood blotched and blackened as if like the veins had exploded inside of him. His eyes were just like red pustules just flowing out of his skull. And his bones were all like twisted like, you know, an exorcism or shit, you know, like he convulsed and just his face was like, you know, something like that. Horrible to see. And so he had to roll his sanity. And Jake's just unaffected. He's already kind of insane at this point, so it don't mean shit, you know. And it's just like, I think I scared it away, but it's still out there, man. Okay. It's like, oh shit. And so they head back inside, and they're like, we gotta barricade this place, man. And I'm like, yeah, do that. Barricade yourselves in. Nothing can get in here or out. And so eventually one of them was like, hey, you know, we'd be like trapping ourselves in here. I think that might have been Ed, actually, who was smart. There you go figure. And so they didn't barricade themselves in, but they locked the front door. And so then I was like, okay, the old lady stands up and she says, oh, I'll just be in the bathroom. I'll be a moment. And it's old school, so she actually has to, like, go outside to go to the bathroom. And they all tried to be like, hey, you really shouldn't do that. It's safer in here. It's not a good time for that. And they all tried their persuades, and they all failed. And she's like, oh, no, don't be a bother. I'll just be a moment. And so they decided that they were going to send, like, an escort. And so the Private Eye went with, and Ren went with. And so they followed outside. And Ren didn't really look at the corpse. He just kind of like glanced over it. So I didn't give him the full sanity. I didn't make him do the sanity yet. Because he's seen a lot of shit. You know, his character has definitely seen some bad shit. And he didn't really examine it too much. So I was like, alright, I'll hold off yet. And so the old lady goes into the bathroom, closes the door. And so they're sitting there kind of chatting about it. Chatting about what's going on, you know, what is this, what the hell, you know, that corpse, oh my god. And if they had not gone with, if they had just let the old lady, yeah, she would have died. No doubt about it. They would have heard a scream, and then they would all rushed out there, and the door would have been, like, melted off, and she would have been, like, her melted corpse, naked, just sitting on the toilet, and so double sanity checks going on, you know. And, so yeah. But that didn't happen. They were smart. They saved her life. For now. And so they all head back in. And so they're like, you know, what are we doing? Like, what do we do? What is going on here, you know? Because, you know, none of them are doctors, which is another strike. None of them know medicine, I don't think. Maybe somebody put points into it, but not majorly, I don't think. And so medicine is kind of big. Not just for healing, because, you know, they can go to hospitals. There's first aid. There's stuff like that. Medicine is real good for examining corpses, for, you know, seeing what poison you just drank, you know, stuff like that. You know, medicine is damn useful. It's one of the recommended occupations in there as a doctor. So that's going to hurt them, you know, unless somebody dies and they switch, you know. But yeah, so they not that they could have really learned much from that corpse, but they would have found out that this is not a natural thing. But I think they already assumed that. So they're like, all right, what do we do? And eventually I had the kitchen doors open and the young girl walk out, you know, clothed in blankets. And she was conscious, but she had kind of semi-amnesia. She didn't really remember why she was out in the road or what happened. All she remembered was she was sitting with her grandfather in their kind of little parlor by the fireplace. And then she just remembers waking up here in the cafe. And they talked with her, tried to get any info that they could out of her. Not much. I didn't want to play my hand just yet. And so all she really said was, I need to go check on my grandfather and make sure he's okay. And I want them to get to the house. And so eventually they were like, all right, I guess we just got to go up there, man. And so the house it's a cottage up on a hill down the road. And so they wanted to drive there. But it's up a mud-slicked hill in the pouring rain. And so, yep, drive auto. And so they went up the hill 3 times. 3 or 4 times. He succeeded only on the final one, which was appropriate. So every other time they tried to go up the hill, they got stuck in the mud on the side of the hill, and so they just had to get out and walk the rest of the way. And so they walk up to this house, and it's a creepy-ass house. You know, it's stereotypical haunted, creepy house. You know, there's no lights on. The front door is flapping open and closed in the wind. There's lightning behind it. You know, you can imagine what it's like. It's an old colonial house, all that kind of stuff. And so they're like, oh, shit. And somebody, I think it was a private eye, he looked... No, it may have been Ren, actually. He looked around the area, like the yard, to see if there was any footprints or anything like that. And finding footprints in this environment is damn tough. But he did succeed, and he found an abandoned crowbar laying in the grass. Aha, a clue. Where's my Scooby snack? And so they're like, okay, we should scope out this place from the outside first. And so 2 of them went one way, 2 of them went the other way. Neil stayed behind, like near the front door or whatever, or on the porch, whatever, with Amelia. Just guarding her. Good thing. Good thing he guarded her. And so they were looking around, they were looking through windows with their flashlights. They weren't really finding anything until Simon and George Mafume looked through one window. They found an older gentleman slumped against a chair with this big, like, gaping wound in his shoulder, and his head was like, you know. He's pretty clearly dead. They also saw on the floor was a corpse, much like the one by the cafe. So they had to roll their sanities. And George lost like 5. And so he let out a scream. You know? And so everybody heard that echoed around the area. And so they all rushed over to see what was going on. And so they all ran over. Neil, Olaf was like, I look around the area, I see if I see anything, like in the tree line. And it was kind of funny. They did this kind of often. And it was never a good thing. Because, basically, if they didn't look, nothing was going to happen. I wasn't really doing anything in the background that they would have suddenly caught upon, you know, like, oh, I caught him, you know. He wasn't even going to be there. Like, that's the thing, like, with this entity. He's wherever I want him to be, you know. And so, if they're not looking, he's not really there, unless I'm about to jump him. But if they are looking, he's always there. Pretty much. And so, Olaf kept looking, and he succeeded on his spot hitting. I'm like, yeah, you see a light, like, in the tree line. And so, one of the abilities that this entity has is like a mesmerizing effect. And so, the way it's written in the scenario is if you roll your power, or in this case, a power times 5, the standard roll, and if you fail, you're mesmerized. And so how it's written is when you're mesmerized by this thing, you stand still. You can't move because you're so mesmerized by it. And so I read that and I'm like, kind of boring. I don't think that's real scary. You know, they're not really going to be afraid of that. So I changed it to when they got mesmerized, you feel compelled to just walk towards this thing. And so, yeah, Olaf got mesmerized, and he started walking towards it. But he was still in control of his actions, apart from walking towards it. So he was like, he had his shotgun out, and he was just... He pulled out his revolver, and he was just firing off rounds. And a couple of them, or one of them, connected. And so the others just see, you know, Neil suddenly just walking towards the wood, just letting off all his firearms and shit. And eventually one of them, like, tackles him or something like that. Or slaps him, I don't remember. They drag him out of it. And, so, at this point, Amelia's like, I can't take that. I have to see if he's okay. And so they try and stop her. They try and grab her, but she runs in. So she sees, you know, the corpse of her grandfather and the corpse of this horrible eaten corpse or dissolved corpse sitting there. And so she cries out. She doesn't go temporary insane. I did roll. She did fail her sanity, but she didn't go temporary insane. So she let out like a little scream and she cried. And so they all went in, you know, a bunch of them looked over this. There were some more sanity rolls. And Ed tried to calm down the girl. And Ed wonders, man, I mean, I can't repeat what he said. It was rambling. I have no idea. But he wonders why I call him the Mert of the group. I mean, it's a no-brainer. If you watch the stream and you listen to when he's doing stuff like this, he's the new Mert. I'm sorry. So he fails his roll. And so he's like, I want to push the roll. And I think I discussed this. You can pretty much push most rolls, except for combat rolls, that you fail, which lets you re-roll. But if you fail the second time, I get to really screw with you. And so I was so ready for him to fail the second roll. Oh, man. Like, she was going to flip out. She was either going to grab somebody's gun and start blasting her way out, or she was just going to sprint into the woods and they would just hear her scream or something like that. One of the two. I guess the first one would be less likely to actually happen, but amazing. But he made the second roll and something like, oh, fine, alright. Boring. And, okay. So they take her to, like, her room to like, lay down and calm down after all this. And so they gotta evaluate this shit. They still gotta search through the rest of the house. And so they go to, I think the private eye goes to the guy's study. And he looks all around. He finds the bureau, or whatever it is, I'm sorry. And it's locked. So instead of looking for the key, or maybe he does look for the key, but it's not in the room. It's on the guy's, it's in like his pocket. He doesn't look there. He just shoots the lock off. And I'm like, all right, great. And so he pops open that. He finds some money, a bank account book, some legal papers, and he succeeds on his spot hidden, and he finds a black journal, leather bound. And so he reads through that as Ren leafs through the two corpses. And so all that's really on the grandfather is the key to that thing, the lock. And then on the young guy, they find a couple spare shells for a shotgun that's lying nearby. There's like a sack mask laying nearby. There's a gas coupon in his wallet, as well as a folded photograph of the waitress at the cafe. Plot thickens. Not really. Not that it's not a red herring or anything, but it's not essential. But they thought it was kind of important, as they would. And so so Private Eye is reading through this journal. And so what this journal says is basically instructions on how to control this entity. It doesn't say what it is. It doesn't say where it came from, how the guy came upon it, or anything like that. All it tells is how to control it. And what you do is you take a person, a human being of any age, and you draw a spiral in blood on their forehead. And then you recite some words that were written in the journal. And this entity will come out of its resting place. And its resting place is a metal coffer that was found on the floor next to the two bodies. It was a very creepy looking thing. It was like a coffin or something. Like a little coffin. And there was some like white powder near it, like white ash, and there was like some wax around the edge. And so that was just kind of spilt onto the floor, this coffer. And so after you do the spiral, you recite the words, this coffer will open up, this entity will come out, devour the sacrifice, and then satiated, it will head back into the coffer. And that's how you control. So, at the end of the instructions, there was also a list of 16 entries with some, letters and dates. And so I had him roll a knowledge to try and figure this out. I don't know if that's the appropriate roll. It could have been intelligence times 3 or something. But I kind of wanted him to know what it was because it's more sanity loss. So he took sanity loss for reading through it, but he also got 1 point in Cthulhu mythos because this is a mythos entity, I guess. It's not natural. But then, since he succeeded on the knowledge roll, I'm like, you realize that these are entries listing sacrifices that the doctor made, using this entity. So he had to make another sanity check. It wasn't huge. I think he succeeded and he didn't lose any sanity, but the threat is there, And so the full story here, they didn't really find out about this. They would have lost more sanity if they had actually somehow found out about this. Was that this doctor, this guy was a doctor, physician, and he became pretty wealthy. Not because he was a local physician, but because he had this entity. And so families, kind of like occult families in the area, knew about this. And they would they would do rituals or some shit on children, pregnant women or something like that. And so these infants would be born with just strange, demonic or something, occult, something like that, where they couldn't be, dispatched in a normal, safe way or something like that. It's fucked up. And so they would go to this guy, and he would do the little spiral, and he would recite the words. This thing would come out and devour these infants, and then go back into its coffin. And they paid him a lot of money, because, this was the best way to do it for them. And so he became very wealthy, and his granddaughter knew nothing about this. She just knew he was wealthy. And so he was, getting old in years. He was kind of retired now, but he still had control of this thing if needed. And so, yeah, it's fucked up. They would have lost a lot more sanity if they had found out about that, because that's pretty terrible. But they didn't. He just knew there were sacrifices made, not really how he was connected to the sacrifices and how money was exchanging hands and whatnot. And so he didn't really share all these details with everybody else. He called Ren into the other room, and he's like, yeah, so basically, we need to sacrifice somebody. And I'm like, yes. Maybe they'll pick the Negro. No, that's terrible. And so he kind of explained some things to Ren, and then they called everybody in, and he explained the most basic details. And so nobody had to roll a sanity loss, because he kind of broke to him pretty gently. And so they're kind of sitting there discussing what to do. And I'm sitting there thinking, because I don't really, I should maybe, but this is when I do my thinking. When they're all talking to each other, and they're discussing stuff that, I already know about and whatever, that's when I do my thinking. And I think, what's the worst thing that could happen right now? That's how Call of Cthulhu DMs think. What is the worst thing that could happen right now? And so, you all hear a blood-curdling scream from the other room of the house. And they're like, oh shit! Because they all left her completely alone in her room. Aha! And so all 5 of them, rush out of the door. They push open her bedroom door, and they all look in. And I'm like, alright, get ready to roll sanity, motherfuckers. Alright, so they see this entity, the dead light. And it's alien, no doubt about it. It's not something terrene or anything like it. It's strange. It's like a mass of floating liquid light that's giving off this phosphorescent glow around it. And it's kind of just swirling around in midair in front of them. And it has these tentacles made of, this liquid light that's just dragging itself over Amelia's face. Just melting it away. And they see that it's melted through the outside wall and the windows. And so it just made a big hole for itself. And she was sleeping, so she didn't notice until it was in front of her and it was too bright, and then just And so they took some different courses of actions. Ren fired his elephant gun. Somebody else fired away. A bunch of rounds went off. I think George Mafume took a picture, as he would do, and I think the other two kind of just were doing not much. And so I had them all roll their attacks for their guns, and if they hit, I had them roll damage. And so how this thing works is, if you roll any attacks that did 6 or less damage, did nothing to it. Nothing. Anything more than 6 damage, do minimum damage. I don't know what that means. That might be just 1 damage. Or if I roll 4d6 and I end up rolling 18, does it just go down to 4? Because that would be the minimum damage you could do with 4d6. I don't know. But they were rolling, his elephant gun is 3d6 plus 4. No matter what, it's going to be 7 damage. It's impossible not to be 7 damage. And so this thing had 16 health. And I'm like, if, this guy's just going to be firing off his elephant gun a few times, this thing's going to die. And so I'm like, fuck that. That's not how this is going down. This thing's immune to all bullets forever. And so they ended up pumping like 60 damage to it over the course of the evening. Nothing. Its health was 16 the whole time. I ain't doing that shit. You gotta be more creative than that. You know, your guns are for cultists and zombies and, you know, ghouls, shit like that. This is something, no. You don't get to shoot guns in this. I let them, and I was like, oh, okay, you know, 12 damage, alright. They thought it had like 200 health or something. But, no, your guns ain't doing jack shit. I don't give a fuck. That's how Call of Cthulhu works, alright? And, okay, yeah, so they all fired their guns, they scared it off. And so it flowed out of the house and into the woods. Or towards the woods. Olaf, he runs out the front door with his shotgun. He's like, no, you ain't getting away. You know, he's firing off all his rounds. And I'm like, alright, roll power times 5. He fails again. He gets mesmerized. So he starts walking towards it again. Because it's trying to lure it into the woods so it can just melt away. I think Ed like runs out and sees that he's, you know, walking towards it, you know, mesmerized again. And so he's like, somebody's got to stop him. And so sequence of events here is tricky. They do eventually stop it. They eventually stop Olaf from moving forward anymore. Because I was like, well, shit. What happens if he doesn't break out of it and none of them stop him? Because I don't want to kill him, but, you know, I might have to. So yeah, they eventually stop him. They all head back into the house. Ed checks on Amelia. He basically finds that this, from here to here, is like melted and caved in. And I have him roll sanity, because he's a psychology student. He's not like a doctor or anything. You know, this is not something he's ever experienced before, and so, yeah, that's pretty fucked up. And, so, okay, the grandfather's dead, she's dead. Shit. And so, eventually they decide, well, I guess we better head back to the cafe and, talk to the waitress about, you know, this picture, like what happened, maybe she knows something. And so I think at one point, yeah, Ren's elephant gun jams. No, not yet. My bad. Forget I just said that. Nobody's gun is jammed yet, I don't think. Maybe Ed's gun jammed here. Yeah, I think that might be it. Yeah, this sequence of events is tricky for me to remember, even though we just stopped playing. Okay, they head back to the cafe. And the Private Eye and Ren go check out the gas station office. And it's locked, so he tries firing at the lock again. He misses, so he shoots through the glass. And they're kind of poking around in there. They don't really find anything. I think Ren grabs like a gas can, but it's empty. He's got to fill it up at the pump. The phone is out. The phone is not working. They thought, none of them said it, and so I was like, they must think that this is like this entity disabled the phone or something. They were like, do we see any, like, is the wire, like, is it, like, connected and everything? And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, why don't both of you roll, like, a knowledge or something? And so they both succeeded. I'm like, yeah, you're pretty sure that it's just the storm that knocked it out. Like, there's nothing weird going on here. Like, oh, okay. While that's going on, the other three head into the cafe. And, so Neil Olaf was the first one in. And I'm like, roll a dodge. So I just want to fuck with them. I want Jake to be more annoying to them. And so he fails his dodge. And so basically Jake just fired. As soon as he heard the little bell ring above the door, he got spooked. He's like, oh! And so he hit Olaf in the arm for minor damage. It wasn't really bad. Maybe it was like 4 damage or something. I don't know. Which I guess is kind of rough. But he got hit with buckshot in the arm. And so just, he's like,
I'm sorry, man. I just got scared. I spooked. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it.
He meant it. He's controlling the entity. Trust me. And so Olaf's just like, oh, you fucking kidding me. And so, I think like Ren, yeah, they run back and they try and patch him up. None of them have first aid. None of them took anything in first aid. And I'm like, oh god. And so none of them can patch him up. And, so they're like, oh, god damn it, Jake, go watch the back door. And, oh, shit. Yes, at one point George Mafume went in. Yeah, he went in, and I wasn't making a big deal out of it. Like, I wasn't going to say anything. Until he spoke up. And he didn't just speak up, he said something to Jake. He was like, yeah, go watch the back door. Or something. And so, I'm like, as Jake, I'm like, fuck did you say to me? You know, I said Negro, but you can imagine what he said. Negro is the polite term back then. That's why I can say it. But I'm sure he said the impolite term. And so he like gets a shotgun, and he's real stupid. That's a big point. He's almost insane at this point. And so I was just waiting for them to just blow him away. But he's like, what the fuck did you say? And he's ready to shoot this guy, you know. Like, take out all his fear and aggression on this poor Negro who directs horror films. And so then they're all just like, whoa. Like, whoa. And then finally Ed's like, I'm sorry, I'll lead the Negro out. He didn't, you know they don't have manners. And I'm just like, I'm like, oh my god, why did he play a black character? It's kind of hilarious, but it's kind of not, you know? And so they lead him out into the rain, and they're like, you stay here. He's unstable, man. And so Jake watches the back door. And, okay. So they're poking around in the gas station office. And yeah, I think this is when the lights go out. I think so. I think I had the lights go. I had the lights flicker at one point, but I think this is where they went out. So the place was plunged into darkness. And, you know, the waitress let out a scream of, you know, shock, startled, whatever. And, Jake's just like, fuck this, man, I'm sick of being scared. I'm gonna take care of this thing. And so he just like, they were discussing like out of character, like, should we try and stop him? And I think at that point they were just like, fuck it. And so none of them tried. And so he ran out. And I basically imagined, if you've ever seen Dog Soldiers, and if you haven't, I don't know what's wrong with you. But in Dog Soldiers, when Spoon goes out there as the bait, he's just like, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. And he just yells out at all the werewolves. That's kind of what I figured Jake was doing here. And so he's just like, come and get it! And so none of them are really looking. I think only George was actually looking out at Jake. Because the light appeared in the woods on the other side of the road and started coming in. And so the light approached, and I think eventually Neil looked. And he got mesmerized again. So I'm like, yeah, you feel compelled to go out there. And so he like shoots out the window of the cafe to step out of it. And I'm like, alright. And so at this point, Ren and the Private Eye hear Jake shouting outside, so they go check it out. They see the light in the woods approaching him. And so they like run up and they start shooting at it. And at this point, Ren's gun jams. So, like, Neil runs out there, gets mesmerized. The other two run out there to try and stop him. They both get mesmerized. So I'm like, oh my god, what is about to happen? And so Neil, Olaf, starts firing off a bunch of rounds from his revolver. I think it was Neil. Yeah. And he critically fails on one of them. And that collides into Jake, like smashes into his spleen. And so he just goes down and, you know. And so now, sorry, that's probably really loud. That's what I get for doing roll mangings on a bench press. Anyways. That just shattered all my thoughts. Anyways, Jake's like lying there screaming in pain. The light continues to get closer. They eventually break everyone out of the mesmeration except for Ed. And the light is like 10 feet away from Jake, and so everybody is just like this. You know, everybody just turns away. And so a true Call of Cthulhu DM would be like, oh, it don't matter. Because, shit. Where am I even going to find that? I'd like to find where it says that. Because it's kind of a important thing. I wanted to kind of quote it directly from the book. No, it's not there. I don't know where that is. Does it kind of just leaf through this? Yeah, I do not know. Okay, asylum, blah blah blah. Creatures, no, it's not going to be in there. I'm betting this is a long video already. I know I'm taking a while here. I don't know why I feel the need to quote this. I'm sure I can tell you almost exactly what it says. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to find it. Sanity, blah, blah, blah. No. No, 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 no. Alright, I have no idea where that is. But basically, it says that an investigator does not need to see to, experience sanity loss. It says that sight is not dependent. It's just an experience that you have. So, by the book, even if you're blind and deaf, you still have to do every sanity check. And so, these characters that are like turning their eyes, you're not even looking at what's happening, they still have to do the full sanity. And that doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense to me, because that seems very fuzzy. That just seems like, let's put in just this rule to prevent people from, going or trying to find a way around this. And, I agree that players are always going to try and find a way around everything. So I pretty much just ignore that rule. I was like, nah, that's bullshit. It doesn't make any sense to me, you know? And so all of them except Ed averted their eyes because Ed could not. He was mesmerized. And so I was like, okay, none of you see what's happening except for Ed, who sees the light just flow into Jake's mouth. Like, it just disappears inside of him. The rest of you hear the worst screams of pain you've ever heard in your entire life. And these screams will haunt your nightmares for years to come. Roll sanity. So I kind of went around that, but I was like, you know, in this situation, it's not just visual. There's probably some pretty horrible screams going on. And so the sanity wasn't as big. You know, it was like a 1d6 if you were watching. But just the sound, it was like a 1d3 or something. And so Ed had to do... Okay, no, what happened was after the scream was going on, somebody fired off a round at Jake because they thought that if he dies while it's inside of him, that might kill it. They were wrong, of course, but that was a good thought. I appreciate it. And so they, like, blew up his head. Like, just the shot didn't blow up the head, but, like, there was a lot of pressure going on, I guess, and it just, like, popped. And the thing just, like, oozed out of there and, you know, flew into the woods. And, so they all broke out of there mesmerized. Everything was good. Not everything was good. Jake was dead. And it was just like, holy shit. So they all went back into the cafe. And they finally spoke with the waitress eventually. And they showed her the picture. And she said that that was her boyfriend, Clem. She didn't lie because, you know. And, I think the private eye did all the talking. And so he was like, you know, he seemed like, I guess he was trying to rob that place. And she was like, oh yeah, they're pretty wealthy, so I guess so, you know. We were supposed to get out of this place, you know, this dump. And he was like, yeah, you must have tried to get some extra money to help you out. Yeah, I guess so. And so the only person that did a psychology roll, and I was trying, like, yeah, we found him dead in the house. I'm so sorry. And she was like, oh, that's terrible. And I don't know. Oh, he was like, do you know if he was like acting odd or, you know, if anything like he had any enemies? Was he acting odd? Was anything like that? And she, I did this as speaking as her. I was like, no. I didn't notice anything. I was really trying to play it up. Because I wanted them to get to the bottom of this. And the only person that did a psychology roll was Ed, the psychology student. But he failed. So, didn't find anything out. And so I don't know if they actually ended up believing her or anything. But she was lying. And so what the background was, like what happened right before the investigators arrived, was this waitress, Mary, hates where she is. You know, obviously. She's not happy with it. And so she sees, like, every day this rich young girl, younger than she is, driving around in this real fancy car and just has more money than she ever will in her whole life. And that just pisses her off every single day. And so eventually she hired her boyfriend and his friend to go break into that place and rob them. And they were going to get out of town. And so they went in there, they got, like, drunk. They, you know, drunk for courage. They put on these masks, and they got their crowbar, and they got their shotgun. They're going to break in there and rob the place blind. And so they get in there, and they get into the parlor where they're just sitting there, and they begin a struggle. Like, the elderly doctor does not go easy. And so he starts, like, fighting with them. And eventually the shotgun goes off. And so the grandfather, the doctor, gets hit right here, but he doesn't die from that. He dies from a heart attack, which they would find out if they knew medicine and they examined it. But, okay. And so then, during the struggle, Amelia gets knocked out, and one of them tips over the little coffer that's on the mantle. So that plummets to the ground, cracks open, and the deadlight comes out. And so it quickly kind of devours half of, Clem. The other guy, Billy, he runs out into the woods, terrified, and the deadlight is just hot on his heels and whatnot, lurking in the woods. And that's basically what happened. And so Mary, the waitress, has just kind of been sitting at the cafe, just kind of biting her nails, because they should be back by now. What happened? And so when they discovered the body, the body right by the cafe of the guy that ran out of the woods, I think like they described him, and the owner was like, "Oh yeah, Billy, yeah, local troublemaker, blah blah blah," and she didn't really say anything. It's not really a big deal. It doesn't really tell them anything, but yeah, that's how that all connects. And I'm still trying to leaf through to find this. I'm never gonna find it. And so, yes. Okay. So they question her. They don't really get anything out of her. She's just, broken up about it. And, so they keep deciding, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And they were like, well, they continue to kind of talk about the sacrifice idea as an option, Because, hey, if shit gets real bad, that might be what we have to do. And so they were like, well, there was a barn near the house, up on the hill, that I had mentioned right when they arrived, but they didn't go in. And so they're like, well, we could go check that out. Maybe there's something in there. And so they're like, okay. So they head back up. He still fails his drive auto. But they head back up to the house. And they're like, all right, we're going to go check out the barn. You guys can head inside. And the deadlight does not make an appearance during this time. They go check out the barn, which is now a garage. So it has, Amelia's nice black Ford Roadster. Nothing really else of note in there. And the others go inside because they want to start fixing their guns. Because their guns completely jammed. They critically failed on some rolls, and so they completely jammed. So they need to succeed on a mechanical repair, of which they put no skill points. And so I was like, all right, if you just sit down for a half an hour, I'll give it to you. If I figure eventually at that point you've got it. But you got to sit there for half an hour working on it. And so they do so. And Olaf, I think, grabs the shotgun from the floor and stuff like that. And they're all just kind of milling around. And I'm like, okay. I think eventually they decide they don't know what else to do. Okay, no. When Ed shot Jake and the thing oozed out of it and ran into the woods, I was like, roll a spot hidden. Because he was the only one looking at that point. He was the only one watching. So I'm like, he has to succeed on this spot hidden. And he did. And so I was like, okay, as it's going into the woods, lightning strikes real close to it. And you see it almost like recoil from the lightning as it goes into the woods. That was a big clue. And so he tells everybody else, he's like, I think it might be like afraid or weak or something to electricity. And they're like, okay. And so there was a lot of discussing with that. But eventually they were like, fuck this, man.
because they had all lost a lot of sanity at this point. They're like, fuck this, we let's just get rid of this, let's just sacrifice somebody. Like, all right, well, who's it gonna be? And so they did all their discussing, and eventually they decided on one of the old people. And so they're kind of milling about the house, and I'm like, okay, everybody except for Ren and Ed, roll listen. And so Private Eye got like an extreme success. He rolled like a 7. I'm like, all right. You hear like this distinct creaking, groaning sound from one of the corners of the house. He's just like, all right, I'll go check it out. And so he goes into one of the rooms where he heard it, and in the far corner of the room, there seems to be like something's going on with the corner. And he like looks closely, you know, he's staring at it, he's watching it, and I'm like, okay, it's almost like it's melting. And he's like, melting? All right, I'll keep watching it. I'm like, all right, eventually it continues to melt away, like spreading to the walls. And then it like breaks away and you see like outside, like it's melted through. And he's like, oh shit! And so he yells to everybody else. They all rush out of the house as the building pretty much collapses. Which is not in the scenario. I was just like, I don't know, I just wanted to do something cool like that. To show them that this thing was kind of smart, you know. And so, yeah, it melted like the foundations. And so the building collapsed. And as it was about to collapse, they were like, did we grab that coffin thing? They're like, no, we didn't. I'm like, all right, who's going to run in? This is your last chance. And so Private Eye's like, I'll do it. I'm like, all right, roll Dex times 3. He failed. I'm like, all right, roll luck. He succeeded. You got like a really good success. I'm like, all right. You run in there, you see the coffin on the floor, but you realize that you are not going to have time to grab it, so you roll out of there just as it collapsed behind you. And so yeah, building is collapsed, and they dig through the rubble, and they eventually find the coffer, and they drag it out. And okay, so they're like, yeah, fuck this, man. We're done with this shit. They were almost ready to just drive off. They were ready to try and drive off to the north, and I would have allowed it. I would have said, okay, you get away. But sanity rolls, man. Not even sanity checks. They would have just lost sanity. Because not only would everybody at the cafe die, but that thing would just spread across the countryside, killing, man. And so it was like, the scenario mentions this. It's like a 1d6 roll right away as they just abandon these people. And then like a week later, once the realization sets in that they did not contain that thing, it's another d6 roll of sanity. And so that could be up to like 12 sanity gone because you didn't finish the job. So yeah. That shit can happen. But they didn't do that. They wanted to finish this. And so they drove down to the cafe. Ren really didn't want any part of this sacrifice idea, but, you know, he had to kind of go along with it because they voted. And so they eventually decided that they're going to get the old woman. They're going to lure her up to the house. And they're like, how do we do that? Well, let's just say that it's safer at the house. And so we have to take them one by one to get up there. And so they're like, okay, so they go in and they're talking and they're like, yeah, it's much safer at the house, so we're going to be taking you guys one by one. And so the one talking to them was the owner. And the owner, as written in the scenario, is a real coward. Like, he's all talk, but he's a real coward. And so I'm like, okay, this is perfect. He's absolutely going to be the first one to volunteer to go to the safer place. So he's like, all right, I'm ready to go. I'll be the first one. And they're like, are you sure? He's like, oh, absolutely. If there's a safer place, I want to be there. And they're just like, you know, fuck it. Like, who gives a shit? Like, this is where you want them to be. And so they get the guy in the car. They're driving up. He finally succeeds on his drive auto. So they get up the hill. And they come up to the wreck of the house. And he's like, what's going on here? And so the private eye's like, I'm going to pistol whip him. I'm like, all right, roll. He misses. And so I think, Ed's like, I'm gonna punch him too. And so he rolls, he hits him, and I'm like, okay, roll damage. His damage for a punch is 1d3 minus 1d4. So he did -2 damage. Yeah, psychology students should not be punching people. So yeah. Then George was like, I'm gonna stab him in the knee. I'm like, all right, roll. He misses, so he like stabs into the cushion. And so then finally, Neo was like, I'm gonna stab him in the other knee. I'm like, all right, roll. He finally gets it. He rolls like 6 damage. And I rolled a con for the old guy, or the the fat guy, and he passed out from the pain. They're like, good. He as soon as he found out what was going on, he started flailing all around, and so there was all sorts of dodge rolls going on, but nobody got hit from that. I was kind of surprised, but yeah. So he was unconscious, and they're like, let's just do this. So they still wanted to try and not kill this guy. Their big plan was, they thought that he might be, killed by light or something. And so their plan was to go to the barn, put the guy in, the doorway of the barn, have the car that's in the barn facing it, park the other car on, the opposite side. And so they could turn on both the headlights and it would just blast right into the guy. Everybody else was inside the barn, and they all had their flashlights and the flash photography already pointed at this guy. And the private eye, did the blood on the thing, and he read the words, and they all just waited in the dark, ready to just blast this thing with light. And so the thing, came to the call of the words, and it landed on top of the barn, and it slowly slithered down, inching towards the victim. And so finally it splashed into the guy's face and started going down his nostrils. And they were like, all right, now! And so everything turned on. And I'm like, all right, I was pretty frank with them. I was like, okay, you basically have a 5% chance of success. And so I'm going to roll a D100, just out in the open. Usually I do GM rolls so they don't see, but I'm going to do this in the open. If I roll a 1 through 5, you win. You succeed. If I critically fumble, as in a 96 through 100, you guys are pretty much fucked. He's going to spaz out, and you're all going to be... Yeah, that's bad. And so I rolled an 89. So, basically, he was too fast for them. He doesn't it would have, in a normal situation, if they had shown a bunch of lights on it, he would have just fled. He would have ran away. It would have flown away. But basically, it just scared it into the guy because it was already heading in that direction. So yeah, it wasn't the greatest plan. And so it slithered into into the guy's nostrils and disappeared inside of it. And everybody was watching. I'm like, okay, who's looking? And they're like, yeah, I think we're all watching now. And so everybody got the full sanity rolls, the biggest one of the evening. 1D... I think it was just 1d6, which is not huge, but yeah. And so, I think a couple people failed. I think one person lost 6 sanity, I think, but he succeeded on his idea roll, so he did not go temporary insane. And I described it in as full detail as I could of how this guy's flesh was basically boiling and glowing as his veins exploded and his eyes were just melting into his skull and his body was convulsing around and you could hear bones just snapping. And yeah, I tried to be as violent as possible because that's called Cthulhu. And eventually he basically just melted into a pile of ash and awful as and the light flooded back into the coffin and it snapped shut. You win. And so they were just like, yeah, fuck that guy. And they buried the coffin like 6 feet down into the dirt. And they packed it all up. Ed stole the girl's car because she's dead. And they just drove off. And they're like, yeah, fuck that. We're done. I'm like, all right. I gave everybody's sanity back. I rolled a 1d6 for each person. And I rolled kind of poorly. A bunch of people got 1s. So I felt kind of bad, but that's how it is. Like a lot of, I think Call of Cthulhu DMs don't ever give sanity back, so be happy with what you get. And so yeah, if they had actually defeated it, they would have got more sanity back, like a 1d10 roll or something. And they were, Private Eye was like, how could we have, Alex Johnson was like, how could we have defeated that? I was really curious. There's a few ways. The main way listed in the scenario is to use the electrical generator. Basically lure it into the basement or set up a trap and electrocute it. Another way would be like jimmy rigging a lightning rod and like attracting it to that, and so it just got zapped by lightning. You could trap it in like fire. If you could engulf it in flames somehow, I would probably allow that. Yeah. That's pretty much about it that I can think of. I mean, you can be ingenious about it, but electricity is the main thing. If you could somehow trap it until daylight, but trapping it is very hard because it could pretty much melt through anything. So making it till daylight, if you survive till daylight, it would basically just go back to its coffin. So you would have won that way, but it would still be there. So it's tricky to defeat. It's tricky to defeat mythos entities, okay? Accept it. So yeah. They did all their little skill checks, so a bunch of them went up in skills, they're getting better, which is cool because I want them to be attached to these characters so they don't do dumb, stupid shit like dive down trapdoors. But, yeah, I'm running to the end of this video. So yeah. They all survived as I planned. That was good. None of them did anything super stupid. And yeah, that was basically to get them all kind of together as a group for when they arrive in New York, so they all kind of know how to work together. They know each other, all that good stuff, and show them that not everything is all natural in this world. There's weird stuff out there that can drive you insane or kill you. So that was for their characters. So it was a lot of fun. It was a fun session, but I definitely look forward to getting back to the main campaign where the real stuff happens. And so yeah, so next week I'm pretty sure we'll be doing Shadowing. We're going to finish that heist, but then it's probably going to be back to Call of Cthulhu, I imagine. I think we're all kind of enjoying it. So back to the campaign proper, where the plot is very thick. Alright, so I think I'm about done here for this. A lot of talking there. I'm sorry. I went through a lot of kind of rules and stuff. But anyways, my name is Mang. This has been Roll Mangging for Call of Cthulhu 6th edition. And I'll see you fine folks next week.